our large nucleus. We have the sensory division, or all of that input coming into the nervous system. So the nervous system is going to know how to respond to the environment and then use the motor division to control that response. You've got your somatic nervous system and your autonomic nervous system. We'll talk about the differences between those. And then the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. All right, and these two you can compare with the fight or flight message and then the rest and relax message. And we'll see how those are both controlled as well. All right, so the central and peripheral nervous system. Central system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system is pretty much everything else, both the motor division and the sensory division, responding to or bringing information into the central nervous system. So two main divisions there. Again, central nervous system being part of the brain and the spinal cord. You have your sensory, again, your sensory or afferent division, and that's going to receive and process the information coming in. And then you have your motor or efferent division, and that is going to control pretty much everything coming out. Which here they list as skeletal muscles, but again, the motor division can control other things as well. The endocrine tissue, other organs, the skeletal muscle. We've already seen that for this last unit, right? So when you're looking at the afferent versus the efferent, it's pretty much a way to tell the difference between the two divisions. You might see, instead of sensory, you would see afferent, and it is pronounced afferent and efferent. You want to be able to tell the person the difference just by saying the word. And basically, you're looking at the difference between the word affect and effect, right? When you affect something or effect a change, right? So when you have an effect on something, or an effect, you're actually making a difference. And when you're affecting something, you're sensing something might be different, or you're giving a person a perception that something might be different. So a little bit differences of the words, again, just between the A and the E, but very big differences in the meanings of the words. All right, so the afferent brings the signals in, and then the efferent gives out the response. All right, peripheral nervous system, all the nerves outside of the brain and the spinal cord, going to carry that sensory information into the brain and spinal cord. This system is made up of 12 main cranial nerves to and from the brain, and then 31 spinal nerves that are to and from the spinal cord. I'll focus mostly on the cranials. The spinal nerves are pretty much just too many to even worry about trying to remember them. And even with the cranials, we'll focus on just a few of the very large main cranial nerves. Subdivisions in the peripheral nervous system, again, we have our sensory and our motor divisions. Again, bringing messages in and sending messages back out. And then you also have the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is part of the somatic motor division. It controls the skeletal muscles directly, and then also the voluntary and involuntary portions of the skeletal system. So anything that was involuntary and skeletal muscle was simply just a reflex, right? Didn't really worry too much about reflexes. We focus mostly on just the voluntary control. And then in the autonomic nervous system, or the visceral motor division, that's going to control all of the unconscious functions. Smooth muscle, so all of the muscle that we don't control, right? The involuntary, smooth cardiac, glands in the part of the endocrine system. So that's all part of the visceral motor division. And soma for body, so somatic controlling the voluntary portion, and then the autonomic controlling the involuntary portion. And then finally, the sympathetic division, that is going to be your fight or flight response. And then the parasympathetic is going to be that rest and digest response. When you talk about control of the autonomic nervous system, you're looking at very specific areas of the brain and the spinal cord controlling very specific areas of the body, and they're pretty much almost in the same areas as sympathetic versus parasympathetic, although you are going to see quite a bit of difference here when you talk about sympathetic, again, that is the fight or flight response, right? So anytime you're walking in the woods and you come across a bear, you're going to get that instant rush of adrenaline, right? What happens when you get that rush? We get the secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine from the kidneys. You get your pupils dilated. Why would your pupils dilate? Why would adrenaline cause your pupils to dilate?
So your vision becomes sharp.
Bringing in more light, right? Again, if I am in danger, I want to know as much about my surroundings as possible. You're going to have an inhibition of salivation. You're going to get more air into the lungs. You're going to accelerate the heart rate. You're going to turn off digestive activity. So obviously you don't want to do this after a big meal, right? You want to stimulate glucose release by the liver. So you want to make sure there's enough glucose in the blood supply to get ready to either fight or flight. You're going to relax the bladder, which is why a lot of people, when they get scared, what do? They're going to urinate, right? And that is a natural response, actually. And then actually you are going to clench those butt cheeks a little bit tighter too as well, all right? Parasympathetic, complete opposite. This is after a large meal, you sit down, you're ready to relax. Constriction of the pupils, stimulation of salivary glands, inhibit the heart rate, contract the bronchi, stimulate digestive activity, stimulates the gallbladder, contracts the bladder, and then relaxes the rectum. So pretty much the exact opposite. Now, look at the controls for these. Pupil contraction up here in the brain stem. Notice what's happening now. When you come back down here, you have to go to the spinal cord to see a pupil dilation. Okay? And most of the time when you're talking about these things over here, these really aren't controlled by the nervous system, right? If I want to dilate my pupil, can I do that with a chemical in my eye? Yeah, you go to the eye doctor, they do certain procedures, they're going to put an eye drop in your eye, and what does it do to your pupil? Expands it out, right? So you have to wear sunglasses when you're walking out of there. These are all due to the endocrine system. Okay, this is not part of the nervous system. This is an endocrine response, all due to the secretion of epinephrine. Pupil dilation, inhibit salivation, open the bronchioles, increase heart rate. All that is due to epinephrine. Okay? So while it is under a direct nervous system control, the nervous system doesn't have to do these things because the endocrine system is going to take care of that for it. Okay? But now, if you look at digestive activity, that is under direct control of the nervous system. Same with stimulation of glucose, relaxing the bladder, and then contracting the rectum. So this part up here is all due to the endocrine activity. Otherwise, the rest of it is controlled by the nervous system. Is it easy to control this stuff? No, especially if you're going to drop epinephrine. A lot of this is going to be like secondary because of the epinephrine. Primarily, the nervous system is going to control these things, but it's also going to be due to the fact that you have epinephrine flooding the system. Okay, and again, direct control here as well on the parasympathetic side. But these first four are definitely directly due to the fact that you have epinephrine flooding the system. Yes.
What about, I know for me personally, sometimes when I feel this fight or flight response, I get really warm. What would that be?
What happens when you're going to accelerate the heart rate? You're going to raise the blood pressure. Where's all the blood going to go? It's all going to go out to the extremities, right? Because you're going to start trying to cool it off. The body's going to want to cool the blood supply out as much as possible. You are going to get an increase in temperature with fight or flight. Different properties of the neuron. Just like I was looking at before, you're looking at a very large body, or soma. Again, the same word for body. You have your dendrites at the top. These are the parts that are bringing in the signal to be processed here in the body of the neuron. All right, so all of these are inputs, and they're bringing in the signal. If the signal is strong enough and deemed necessary to send down to wherever it has to go, whether it be endocrine tissue down here, or a skeletal muscle, or another neuron, The processing of the signal happens up here at the body, and then basically you get a decision right about here in the cell. If the signal is going to be sent, it will be sent through the axon. Otherwise, the signal is stopped up here in the body. Okay? Now, the axon itself is going to be that basically a piece of wire that's going to conduct that signal. And just like we talked about before with the skeletal muscle, we are talking about a chemical signal coming in being converted into an electrical signal. And the electrical signal is what's going to pass down the axon. As with most wires you have in any sort of electronics, what do you have on those wires usually?
Plastic.
You have some sort of coating, right? You have some sort of insulation there, and that's what the myelin sheath here is for. The myelin sheath is going to help insulate the axon and help the signal move down the axon because it is an electrical signal. What we're talking about here is basically changing that overall negative charge on the inside of the cell, right? We're going to change it to a more positive, and that's going to allow that message to be sent down to these areas down here at the end, the synaptic knobs. What happens at the synaptic knobs that helps send out neurotransmitters? Because that's the first step we had in Unit 3. Change of electricity comes through and it opens up the voltage gated, which ones? You've got calcium, potassium, or sodium. Calcium, right? Calcium floods in, binds to the vesicles bind to the synaptic knobs. Yes?
What's because the dendrites look exactly the same as the synaptic knobs.
And they pretty much are.
Okay.
You're going to see voltage gated ion channels here, you're going to see voltage gated ion channels here.
So how would you tell? I mean, really the only difference is just the location of where they are on the cell.
Some neurons can go both ways. Right, so this is the classic example of a neuron.
Okay.
This is why we start with this. It's easier to think of it as a one-direction system. But a lot of the neurons are actually bimodal and go both ways. All right, so these myelin sheaths are going to help condition the signal and make sure that electrical signal stays strong enough and continues down the axon. All right, these are made up of actually special cells. We'll get into that here in a bit. You can see there's a nucleus in each one of these myelin sheaths. And in between the myelin sheaths, you have these open areas. These are called the nodes of Ranvier. And basically, these myelin sheaths are made up of Schwann cells. That's why they list a Schwann cell here. And these areas that are open, these nodes are called internodes. Yeah, that's an R in there, not intermodes. Internodes, okay? You can't cover the whole wire because you still have to be able to change the negative charge on the inside of this part of the axon, but you don't want to do it to the whole axon. That would cause a slowage in time, and it would actually cause you to use too much sodium and potassium to get that signal all the way through. So really what these Schwann cells are doing is helping you save sodium and potassium by only having you change the electrical charge on the inside of the cell here in the nodes. We'll actually get to that here in a little bit. All right, so properties of neurons. They are excitable. They can respond to a stimuli. They conduct or transmit an electrical signal, and at the end, they are going to secrete a neurotransmitter. And so again, we've seen this part in Unit 3, right? The secretion of acetylcholine, which allows for a muscle contraction in the skeletal muscle. The first step we had in Unit 3 was our last step here in Unit 4. So they really do tie together quite a bit. Neurons are going to communicate with other neurons. Talking about the brain and the spinal cord. Muscles, all three different types, and then different glands and organs as needed. All right, so can pretty much interact with all types of tissue in the system, and they're going to communicate in a couple of different ways. You can have a synapse, which is the example we've seen between the neural system and the skeletal muscle system. You're going to have a space between the tissues, between the neurons or the neuron and the tissue it's supposed to communicate with. That is going to require a neurotransmitter, and then the example they give is acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junctions. So anytime you see a synapse, you're going to have to send a chemical out to send the signal to the next tissue. When we talk about gap junctions, what type of connection is a gap junction again? No, we talked about them in general biology. Remember when two cells were together, but they shared the same cytoplasm because they had openings in the cell membranes that would actually enable them to communicate very quickly. There's no spaces between the neurons now for gap junctions. Basically what you're talking about is they're touching, right? So the cells are actually connected and they're sharing cytoplasm. So you don't have to send out a signal. You can just have that voltage change go from one cell to the next cell. Okay, we'll see both examples. Well, we've already seen the first example, right? Neuromuscular junction, we saw the synapse, and then the gap junction, the cells are simply connected and sharing cytoplasm. All right, so neuron structures, dendrites, they're going to receive the signals from the sensory receptors or other neurons. The soma, or the body, houses the nucleus and the other organelles that are required for work. The axon is going to conduct that signal. The myelin sheath are the Schwann cells that are going to insulate the neuron for signal conduction, right? The nodes are the unmyelinated spaces between the Schwann cells, and we'll see why the nodes have to be there. The internodes are the actual myelin-covered regions, so they're just calling these actual regions internodes. And then you have either synaptic knobs or synaptic vesicles, usually both at the end, and those are used to release neurotransmitter and send that signal to the next either neuron or tissue that they're communicating with.